Matt Whitaker, former U.S. Acting Attorney General.
This is such a great conversation about America, our future, what's going to save our republic.
We have a great football player. Matt Whitaker is here. Matt.
They tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed.
It's a touchdown, Whitaker.
Former Acting U.S. Attorney General.
Under President Trump.
I'm going to be an unwavering supporter of law enforcement.
Welcome to Liberty and Justice with your host, Matt Whitaker.
Today's episode is sponsored by Save Missouri Values PAC.
Welcome to Liberty and Justice. I'm your host, Matt Whitaker. I have the great honor today of being joined by Sheriff Mark Lamb from Pinal County, Arizona. Sheriff, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I thought it'd be good to have you on to talk about really law enforcement week, what that means, and, you know, the challenges and the opportunities that law enforcement has. So thanks for joining us. And, you know, why don't you talk a little bit about Police Week, what Police Week is, and at the same time talk about uniquely how your force there in Arizona is affected by the current trends.
Well, you know, Police Week has always been a week that we take out of the year where we honor those who are currently serving or who have served, who've been injured in the line of duty, killed in the line of duty. It is really just an opportunity to really honor this profession that is so important to America. And it honestly is probably the backbone of why America is the strongest country in the world. And so it means a lot. I'll tell you what, I think it's getting more meaning now, especially over the last couple of years, as we've watched the politicians in this country and the mainstream media turn their backs on law enforcement and try to vilify us. I think this being able to recognize those who do this job, take a week to honor them, I think is super important.
Yeah, and, you know, I think, you know, if you remember the 8 years, and I know you don't want to go back there, but the 8 years of Obama and really how demoralized, you know, from the top, that administration kind of talked down to police, blamed the police. You know, you had the Ferguson effect, and, you know, sort of the Trump administration, based on the people I've talked to in law enforcement, you know, really encouraged and celebrated and you know, were there for law enforcement. You know, I had the great honor when I was the acting attorney general to go around the country and, you know, tell you know, sheriff's deputies and police officers how much we appreciated them, how we had their back, they had our thanks. And I think that really started to get into you know, energize a lot of police officers. And now you have the Biden administration, it just feels like we're right back where we started.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. The reason I am the sheriff now is because of the Obama days. I was a police officer, started under Obama, and did not like the direction of the country. I didn't want to be the guy that bitches about it but doesn't do anything about it. So I decided to run for sheriff, but it was large in part because of the direction that President Obama was taking this country in. It was not good for law enforcement. Frankly, it wasn't good for America. And then came along President Trump, and absolutely overnight it turned around. He gave us a seat at the table. He allowed us, he listened to us. You know, he would bounce ideas off of us. We came together as local law enforcement, as the federal government, to fix problems that were ailing our communities, like the border crisis. As a sheriff from Pinal County, which we're between Phoenix and Tucson, I'm not the largest county in Arizona, I went to the White House 10 times during President Trump's tenure there. And so he absolutely was a president. His whole administration, including you, we always felt like we had a place at the table. We felt like, especially as sheriffs, he understood the value of the elected sheriff in America and the important role that we play in preserving freedom and the Constitution. He got it. And it's been sad to watch over the last 2 years as that has been completely abandoned again. And we're back to where we were, probably worse than it was under the Obama days.
Yeah, and you mentioned something I think is so important. I know, you know, I have a lot of friends that are in the police force, whether they're police officers or chiefs, but they're always responsible to a mayor and a city council, and they have, you know, especially in major cities, have some real challenges that we've seen play out over the last several years, where the politicians are cowards and then they, sort of point the finger and take away resources, defund the police, all the crazy stuff. But sheriffs are directly accountable to the people and are elected. And I think that's one of the great things about sheriffs is, you have a direct line to your sheriff. And it is very consistent with our Constitution that the people are in charge and they elect you to be the chief law enforcement officer in the county. And so, what are you hearing from the people of Pinal County? And, what's the general mood, sort of the electorate? And, feel free to talk about sort of the southern border and some of those challenges you uniquely face in Arizona.
Well, the people in Pinal County, I think for the most part, really appreciate law enforcement. They understand the importance of law enforcement. We feel it every day. We have guys that have come to work here that are laterals, which means they've worked somewhere else and now they're at our agency, coming from California, Oregon, New Mexico. They can't believe the support that we have here in this community. A lot of it is the work that we've done to be very open and honest with our community and what we do and how we do it. And we've taken risks like live PD and 60 days in and things that are a little outside the box. But I'm an outside the box guy, and I believe that we owe it to the people. And because we've done it that way, we have felt their support. But I will tell you that my population here is very frustrated with the federal government. Their inability to secure our southern border not only affects my community, but my people also understand this affects America. And they feel they want to help these other states throughout this country that are going to be completely bombarded with the human trafficking and especially the drug trafficking into this country. I've often said, especially lately, every one of us will be impacted, but on some level, on a very intimate level, by fentanyl over the next year or two with the amount of drugs that this administration is willfully or at least absolutely ignorantly allowed to come into this country. So we're trying to hold their feet to the fire every day. I see people trying to put pressure on us as a state, like, what are we going to do? And granted, we are working hard, but let's not forget whose job it is. It's the federal government's job to secure the border. They're mandated constitutionally to protect our country, and they're not doing it. And we have an opportunity this year to hold them accountable for their inaction and their failure. It's not even just inaction, it's their failure and actually passing or willfully ignoring certain policies and laws that are hurting this country. And so they should be held accountable, impeached, resign, whatever. We've got to make some changes or we're going to be in real big trouble.
Yeah, I know as I get around the country, I talk to a lot of law enforcement that are frustrated, but especially they're having a hard time recruiting and getting good people into their open positions. Are you having the same experience in your county, Sheriff, or what are you seeing from law enforcement recruitment?
I'm happy to report that we're not. We've been very fortunate, but that's because of the leadership we've tried to implement here in this agency. We have not been afraid to stand up for what is right. I stood against the governor for mask mandates. I stood up against vaccine mandates. I continually to stand up to things that are not conducive to the Constitution and freedom. And because we've done that, because I have my guys' backs, and because I support them and allow them to go out and do the job that the people expect us to do, guys want to come here and work here. There are a lot of men and women that are still willing to put on this badge every day and be warriors for truth and righteousness and freedom. And they just need leadership that's going to stand for them and take the bullets for them. And my guys see that, and other people see that throughout the country. And so we've been fortunate. Now, having said that, I'm still struggling in the jail. It's been hard, but that's a national thing. But I'm gonna really dedicate some time over the next few months to really get in and get my feet wet in the jail and hopefully bring some people out here. For anybody out there considering this profession, I will still tell you, this is an honorable profession. We need warriors and men and women of honor and integrity now more than ever. Please get into this profession. It's a great profession, and you can lay your head down every night on your pillow and know that you've made a difference in your community.
Yeah, what a strong sales pitch, and I'm glad you said that because I think so much of the national mood over the last several years has almost tried to convince folks that it's no longer a noble profession, or that somehow that it's a flawed, or that it's even as horrible as to suggest it's racist. But I know that the law enforcement I've worked with has always, like you said, not only been warriors, but have been dedicated to law and order. And I think that's ultimately what the American people want. And you've heard me talk about it before when I was down with you for the President Trump's rally a couple months ago, and that is every child deserves to be able to play safely in their front yard. And for too many kids, they just can't do that in their neighborhood. They can't go down to the park. And I think that's the law enforcement has a unique position especially in our major cities, to make sure that the gangbangers and trigger pullers and all those the bad element are off our streets, so that these kids can have a safe community that they can go outside and play.
And the cops are willing to do it. They just want administrators who are going to support them and stand up for them and stand up for the rule of law. Abraham Lincoln had the best quote, and I think it's applicable to what we're seeing in law enforcement and the lack of real strong leadership. He said that to be silent when they should protest makes cowards of men. And frankly, we've seen over the last 2 years, too many politicians, too many leaders in law enforcement who stayed silent, who didn't stand up and protest. Look, the statistics don't support this whole reform movement. The statistics don't support racial claims or bias claims. They just don't. I think that any good leader out there is always trying to perfect our profession, and I want to do it the best I can and treat people with dignity and respect. But at the same time, I'm not going to allow you to spew lies. Like Rudyard Kipling says in his poem, if you can watch your words twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools. And that's what's happened is we've watched these things be twisted by the media and politicians to make a trap for other people to believe what they're saying. And frankly, it's just not true. And I refuse to be one of those guys that sits silent while this happens.
Well, and that's why I had, during Police Week, I had to get you on my show because, you're a national leader among your peers and in law enforcement. You're unafraid to speak the truth, which I think, should be a model for all, because, that is fundamentally in our country, our not only our constitutional right, but like you said, Lincoln suggests it's our duty to speak the truth and to, kind of stand up for our fundamental values. And so, I'm proud to count you as one of my friends. And I know that, when I'm in Arizona, I feel a little safer knowing that you're down there as well.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. I appreciate it.
Sheriff, what do you think is, how do you feel about the future of law enforcement and policing? Is this just a blip? Have we the cycles back and forth? Every generation has to see a rising violent crime rate to get it and to understand that we need to invest in law and order policies and people? Or is this something that, as we continue to hurtle forward as a country, that this is a Achilles heel for us that we need to get fixed?
I think the pendulum is actually swinging back. I think that the time between the pendulum swings will shorten. So I think we're going to see a little bit more topsy-turviness, especially under weak leadership like what we have in this country right now. You're going to continue to see it as long as they do not uphold the rule of law, which, starts at your borders. It starts in your communities. As long as we have people that are county attorneys, judges, attorney generals, or bad law enforcement leadership, we're going to continue to see these variations in how people support law enforcement. I do believe the pendulum is swinging back. You can already see it. It's mostly politics when you see leftists saying, we need to refund the police. We need to give them more money. A lot of that is politics, but they're also seeing the destructiveness of their policies that they've had over the last year or two, right. of ignoring the rule of law, of allowing bad behavior to be so pervasive in their communities, and now they're paying the price. The problem is the longer you allow this to happen, the harder it is for us to regain control of law and order and to make our streets safe again and our community safe and to remove the drugs from our communities. This will have a long-term impact on our society, but I do believe the pendulum will swing back where law enforcement will be seen how they should be seen, which is pillars of the community.
Yeah, and you make such a good point. The tone out of DC, and is so important. And when you have really what appears to be a two-tiered system of justice, where the left can protest, threaten, Schumer can stand there and suggest that Supreme Court justices will get their due, and then people show up almost on cue to their houses and nothing's done. Yet at the same time, conservative pro-Trump protesters are treated, sort of by the millions as, terrorists and domestic terrorists. You have the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, who suggests that the priorities of the Department of Justice are parents at school board meetings and airline passengers and Trump supporters, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the American people have a hard time not believing, in my mind, that there is a two-tiered system of justice, that the politically powerful on the left are protected by the institutions, and those of us that are conservative or support President Trump are exposed and are kind of under constant investigation. I mean, do you feel the same thing out in Arizona that we feel here in the rest
I
of
think
the
all
world?
Americans feel it, Matt, because it's what's happening. It is what's happening. We watched, you know how it is. I've had the FBI take cases before. It takes like 2 to 3 years. And you're going to tell me in 6 months they were able to round up 700 people that were at the Capitol on January 6th? Just think if these same people were Trump supporters at Sotomayor's house, what would the FBI and Merrick Garland do to those people? Oh man, they'd have them in the gulag, man, like they have the other folks. And and I don't want. This is always a very touchy subject, but I do not like it when they impugn all of the people that were there for January 6th. That was their First Amendment right. That is what the Founding Fathers set up, their ability to show up and redress their grievances. 99% of those people that were there in a peaceful manner. There were some people that obviously broke the law, and I think you and I and every other law enforcement person would agree they should be held accountable. But to impugn everybody because of what happened, the actions of a few, is not only unfair, it is actually un-American. I mean, honestly, it'd be no different than impugning an entire race of people for the actions of just a few.
Yeah. And it's intellectually lazy. Let's be honest. I mean, there were over 1 million people in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, and those that violated the law should be prosecuted. But they shouldn't be prosecuted more than anybody else who violates the law. And they shouldn't, they shouldn't be punished or detained or unnecessarily, really taken to the ends of the law because what they did was reprehensible. I just this is tough, like you said, because as law and order people, we have to follow the law. We have to hold those that violate the law accountable, but you just can't do it with enthusiasm to certain types of people and then reluctantly with other types of people. And if I know, and this is going to be unpopular by the liberal media, but I know that those people in the summer of 2020 at the White House that were protesting after George Floyd's death, if they could have gotten into the White House, they would have. And they started fires and all the kind of things. And, I think about what I saw after the Republican convention at the White House when I came out on the streets and it was just utter chaos and anarchy. None of those people were held accountable. And that's why I think the American people just see this two-tiered system of justice, that we have to evenly apply the law, and it cannot be based on which political party you're a part of or you support.
Here we apply the law evenly. That's what needs to happen. We don't care what your political stance is. It's never the question we ask when we're processing a crime or responding to a call for service. That just doesn't matter. And we don't, because a Republican politician comes to me and addresses a potential crime, I don't just run out and start charging people for that. We treat it as it's supposed to be treated. And the people in America, look, I get it all the time, especially amongst law enforcement guys. There is a real lack of trust in federal government right now and federal law enforcement. And it feels like if you're of a certain mentality politically, or you have a certain mindset, if you love America, if you fly a flag in your front yard, they want to deem you as being an extremist or something, which is absolutely crazy. And we've got to break away from that. And the only way we do is we stand up for what we believe, and we don't let these folks bully us. We just cannot. General George Washington said when he left office, President George Washington said when he left office the first time, in the circular letter of 1783, he says, with the conviction of the importance of the present crisis, silence in me would be a crime. We can no longer be silent as these things happen. If we continue to be silent, they're going to continue to happen, and it's only going to get worse and worse. We have to stand up and say, look, this is not okay. We're here to do what is right. We support you if you're going to do what's right, but we cannot stand by if you're going to just continue to do what you're doing.
Well, you are a true patriot, and I really appreciate you taking the time. In the final minute or so that we have, is there any message you'd like your fellow citizens or fellow patriots to know from you, Sheriff?
Absolutely. We still live in the greatest country in the world. That's why 300,000 plus people show up at our southern border every month, because they want a piece of America and the freedom that we enjoy. We need to come together as Americans, understand that we have differences of opinions, different cultural backgrounds, different belief systems, but in the end, we're all Americans. And this country will survive. The Constitution is a God-given document, and it will win out the day, which it's consistently doing when it gets challenged in court. And in the end, I just ask you, what do you want your future generations to say about you? This is your time. I like to tell stories of the founding fathers. This is your time to what the stories that they're going to tell about you. Oliver North asked me a question. He says, what do you want your grandchildren to say about you? And I said, I want them to say that I was a patriot who fought valiantly for freedom, for God, for family, and for America. And so this is still the greatest country. Fight for it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I got chills from that. Sheriff Lamb from Pinal County, Arizona, thank you so much for being on Liberty and Justice. As I mentioned before, we can be premiered every Friday at 7 p.m. on CPAC Now. And then you can find us anywhere podcasts you might listen to or found. Otherwise, everything I'm doing is on Whitaker.tv. Sheriff, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. God bless.
Hey everyone, this is Matt Schlapp with CPAC, and it's my privilege to tell you that we've got a very important project that we've just announced, the First Amendment Fund. It's a brand new fund that we've created through our criminal justice reform efforts to raise money to take care of you, Americans who are being canceled and desecrated out there around the country. We know it just happened in Virginia, where parents were called domestic terrorists by the Biden administration, where people who just want to express their political views are canceled left and right. Now we have this terrible specter of a vaccine mandate where you can lose your job or be prevented from going to a restaurant or go to school according to your vaccination status. These are all the things that are happening in this country that are making people realize that America is in a fight to defend the principles that have made her great. If you want to be involved in this important effort, please go to conservative.org, click the link for the First Amendment Fund. Please donate to this C3 to help these victims across the country, including those who are just involved in politics, to make sure they have the legal representation they need to be able to live their great American life.
Welcome back to Liberty and Justice. I'm your host, Matt Whitaker. I'm excited today. We are celebrating, and in fact, when this airs, we're in the middle of Police Week, which is an annual celebration of law enforcement and the sacrifices that they make every day on our behalf. And I have with me the sheriff from Baldwin County, Alabama, Hoss Mack. Sheriff, good to have you with me.
Hey, great to be with you today. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, as you know, when I was the Attorney General of the United States, I took great pride in saying, we have your back and you have our thanks. And so make sure, first of all your deputies know that there are many patriots that admire and respect and appreciate everything they do for us.
Well, I certainly will, and particularly during, as you mentioned, this week, it's even a little bit more meaningful as a lot of law enforcement officers across our nation are going to be remembering those who paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah, and I know you're heading up to Washington, D.C. to be part of some of those very solemn and important ceremonies. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of those ceremonies that you're going to take place in?
Well, sure. We actually fly into Washington, D.C. on Thursday to start all the events. On Friday night will be the candlelight vigil that will be at the National Law Enforcement Memorial there in Washington, D.C. And, of course, this memorial, for people that haven't seen it, is built along the same lines as the Korean and Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It actually has all the names of all the individuals who have been killed and died in the line of duty in the United States. And this goes all the way back to the late 1700s when the first officer, actually a sheriff in New York, was killed in the line of duty. So that'll be a candlelight vigil. All the names will be read by family members, and we will be dedicating their names on the memorial. Then there's several smaller events throughout the day on Saturday. And then on Sunday, we will be at the United States Capitol. We will be on the west side, and there will be a ceremony that's hosted by the Fraternal Order of Police. And this is a ceremony where spouses or surviving family members are allowed to come up and place a rose in a large arrangement that will be there. Of course, there'll be several guest speakers. We've had presidents, we've had attorney generals, we've had senators that come and be a part of this ceremony, and that will conclude the ceremonies for National Law Enforcement Memorial Week.
Yeah, such an important remembrance, I think, more than anything. But, you know, there's so many, you know, I've been doing this show for almost 3 or 4 months now, and I've had a lot of people, you know, we've talked about inflation, the economy, the war in Ukraine, but I wanted to make sure I dedicated this episode to the men and women of law enforcement. And so, you know, it from what I can tell, I just saw a statistic that, you know, like in Chicago, they're having 10 times more retirements than they are people that are signing up to be in the force. And so what's been your experience recruiting and retaining talent in your sheriff's office?
Well, you know, it really started pre-COVID. Our numbers were doing pretty good pre-COVID, and then after we started getting into the COVID epidemic, we did start to see some fewer applications coming in. But since that time, we've also now noticed a problem with retention. The economy definitely has a huge impact on this. And for law enforcement, and you, of course, having worked in law enforcement yourself, you know that for most of the time when we're talking about recruitment for people in law enforcement, to a large degree, we're actually in competition with our other agencies, whether they be state, local, or federal. Yep. But one of the things that the economy has placed upon government, if you will, as far as their employers, we're now competing with the private sector. And so there's a lot of competition there to get people to apply, to get people to train. And once again, once you have them, is to retain those individuals, because law enforcement, we put a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of emphasis on training. And that's one of the things the public wants. And so when we literally are putting 20, 30, 40, 50 weeks of training into an individual, we want to make sure that we're able to hold on to that individual for a long period of time so that they can perform their duties. So our agency is 380 people, and we have not been full staff now in over 4 years. Wow. And as of this week, we had 49 openings. Some of those openings were in our enforcement division, some were in our corrections division, but also a large number of was in our administrative and support division. So we literally have openings in every arena of our sheriff's office.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, so much, I love talking to sheriffs because unlike police chiefs who are responsible to mayors and city councils, sheriffs are responsible to the people that elect them and keep putting them in office. As you get around your county, you know, what are the concerns of your fellow citizens, and what are they expecting out of you and your deputies?
Well, one of the things, we're very blessed. As you said, we're Baldwin County, Alabama. We're on the coast. We're a county that's between Mississippi and Florida here in lower Alabama. And we really do enjoy a large support of our law enforcement in this area. However, the concerns that I hear are some of the things that are happening in the extreme west. some of the things that's happening up in the north and everything, when you talk about defunding the police, when you talk about further police regulation, we all either wear a badge, a star, or whatever, and we're all kind of grouped in by the public into one large group. And so the local concern is we hope that we don't see some of those things happen here. And we really haven't seen those. But once again, it is a concern. Is it going to happen? What impact is it having? Even those areas far away from us, is it going to have a local impact? And so there's a large concern about the movement to either defund the police or in some cases over-regulate the police, where some of that is going to have an impact on our agencies.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest concerns I have, and one of the things that we worked very hard in the Trump administration on, was reducing violent crime.
Absolutely.
But we've seen this surge, especially in our major cities, and really almost a devaluation of human life. Talk to me a little bit if you're seeing any of those trends in your county, and if not, sort of what you're doing right to make sure that violent crime trend that's afflicting our major cities doesn't affect the fine people there in Baldwin County.
Oh, certainly. This is my 37th year in law enforcement. So we can look back in the 1980s. There was actually, we called it a good time in law enforcement. There was a lot of positive growth in law enforcement at the federal, state, and local level, a lot of support for law enforcement. We went through the 90s. We saw that we started seeing some crime trends increasing and things of that nature. And I will tell you that during the Trump administration, we probably had some of the best cooperative and supportive for law enforcement that I've ever seen in that 37 years. The President Trump's administration, everything down to his directors, different ones on the cabinet and in the staff, they were very engaged in law enforcement. And this was following the 8 previous years where we saw some disengagement. We saw some different things, and we just saw some things happening. I think that added to, and in some ways even promoted, some of the discontentment that we're seeing today. Mm-hmm. We're seeing some of that now, and it is frustrating. It's the old adage, you want to help people, but you also want people to help themselves. Yep. And there's a lot of people that just aren't even willing to help themselves. And there's a disengagement, and there's this distrust from a lot of people on law enforcement that a lot of times is not based on fact. It's based on different things that are being promoted and some of the protests that occurred and things of that nature. And so we're very mindful of that. We talk about this at staff and command meetings all the time when we're talking about engaging the public. And so a lot of times local law enforcement specifically, we're trying to engage people face to face every day personally. But yet there's some of these movements by some of the national news media that tries to disengage some of the things that we're doing. And so sometimes you feel like it's the old 2 steps forward, 1 step back that we're trying to do. But I really do think that overall, and particularly in our area, most people are supportive of law enforcement, that they're very concerned. We have the highest homicide rate that we've had in Alabama in some of our larger metropolitan areas that we've had in years. Yeah. And I think we actually had one of our neighboring counties, which was the county of Mobile, they were back to the 1990s numbers as far as their homicide rate that they had. So we are dealing a little bit, both fighting on the violent side, and most of what we see, and particularly in our area, it's not stranger homicide. These are domestic-related homicides. They're people that know each other. They're gang-related homicides. And there's just a lower appreciation, not only for life, in the taking of life, but it also seems like people are no longer fearful of the system, of going to prison, of being arrested and being prosecuted, and that does give us some challenges.
It does, and when I was in the Trump administration, obviously, what you felt in your county or in your state was meaningful and intentional. We made sure that we knew what had happened during the 8 years of the Obama administration. We wanted to make sure that the police and sheriffs and all of law enforcement felt valued and appreciated and supported and funded and all the kind of things that was necessary. So I'm glad that, you're not the first person that's told me that what we were doing was working and was encouraging law enforcement to, kind of partner with us to do these important cases. And, I think we've lost some of those gains in this current administration. I think, their enforcement priorities were not the same as what you saw in the Trump administration. And, I think obviously while you're kind of on the border, you're a water border though, you still, I'm sure, are seeing some of the challenges that are coming out of our border states. And really, as someone once said recently, every state is now a border state.
Absolutely. We have two of the largest drug corridors that flow from the west that come through our state. Interstate 10, which of course runs all the way from Houston, Texas, going all the way to Jacksonville, Florida, of course, all the way to California actually, but that's a huge drug corridor. There are some estimates that even put it in the 80 percentile range of the drugs that are coming through our area are coming across the border there. I-20 is another area that comes through our state. And then we have I-65 that fuels up to the north, right up through Chicago. And so we have seen an increase in the drug trafficking over the past couple years. We have seen an increase in what we believe are some semblances of human trafficking. And we relate that directly back to the border. We actually started seeing a decrease of drug activity and a decrease of criminal activity from people from other states in our area during the previous administration. And it was something that was well documented. We saw it, and it worked very well. And I think one of the things that most people don't realize is, one of the biggest successes law enforcement can have is when it works together. And so particularly in the career criminal. So if you have the career drug smuggler, you have the career financial criminal, things of that nature, one of the things that they fear the most is when they can both be prosecuted at the state and the federal level, because a lot of crimes will meet the criteria for both areas of prosecution. And in some of the cases I was involved in as an investigator years ago, whenever we could walk in and say, well, you've been indicted in the state of Alabama for this, but you've also been indicted in the Southern District of Alabama in the federal court system, we were able to put the bad people away for an extended period of time, and that had a significant impact.
Yeah, and I saw that when I was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa, how working together with the state and the local law enforcement could oftentimes bring great results for cases that would have the most impact. And as you know, there are enough crimes and enough criminals that you can't get to all of them, and you got to make sure you prioritize which crimes and which criminals and how are you going to sort of enforce the law, because it's obvious it's a constant and ongoing thing, and it's a shame. But obviously, I'm a proponent of especially the trigger pullers, the gang bangers, the international drug cartel folks. Those are the people that are causing a lot of this chaos in our communities. And so I agree, whenever we can partner, with the feds to work on some of these, impact cases, it's when we're at our best. So I appreciate all the work. I thought to myself that obviously you probably knew my former boss, Jeff Sessions, when he was the U.S. Attorney, State AG, and Senator and Attorney General. So you saw him through the entire course of his career really in law enforcement and in public politics.
Well, I had the opportunity. We worked in operation in the early 1990s, and it was with the U.S. Customs at the time. And Jeff was our local federal prosecutor here, our local U.S. attorney. And we tried 13 defendants in that, and it was directly connected to the Medellin cartel. Yep. And it was a large thing. And I had the opportunity to work with Jeff that. And then, of course, when he was U.S. Senator, he had formed a law enforcement committee that was an advisory committee to his office. And then, of course, during his time as the United States Attorney General. And so that's the type, not only the type people that we need working in our federal prosecution system, but the type character. The people that are willing to say, enough's enough, we got to get serious about this. We need to address the problem. The way you address the problem is you address the problem head on through cooperative law enforcement. We have to have the support of Congress in order to enable the laws and things of that nature. But it really starts with the administration as well. And one of the things that's frustrating is when you have an administration that seems to turn more towards how can we do things differently and how can we do things and address problems either with programs and things of that nature, rather than looking at the problem head on and saying, look, we're going to solve this problem because we're going to put the bad people in jail, we're going to hold the people accountable, and we're going to support the law enforcement and the prosecutors who are doing the job.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. So, Sheriff, as you look forward, to doing your job into the future, obviously this recruiting challenge has got to be front and center. But what are the other challenges that you're facing, and how do we address those challenges?
Well, of course, when we talk about recruitment, and so we talked about retention, law enforcement officer pay. If you look at it right now, we actually felt like we were gaining some ground in that area over the past few years, but this economy is just hurting everybody. The economy, the cost of gas, the cost of groceries, the cost of commuting, the cost of health insurance, all of these different things, they have a significant impact on our retention factor. And as I said earlier, we're competing with the private sector. Just today, we had a company, the largest aluminum manufacturer in the world, is going to build a local plant here in our county on a 2,000-acre site. But they're going to create 1,000 jobs. Yeah. And it's going to be a huge impact because they're going to be pulling from our employment pool. So I think one of the things we've got to make sure that we're telling people that law enforcement is not just a job, it is a calling, it is a career, and there are rewarding aspects of law enforcement, but that's also going to fall back upon the leaders and the administration to make sure that we are empowering these people through training, through proper compensation, and making sure that they feel that they're part of a team that is making a significant difference in protecting this country. And those are some of the things that are going to be our challenges to do that, and that's why it needs to be a cooperative team effort, everything from the federal all the way down to that local two-man police department, that we're able to do that. All
right. Well, Sheriff Hoss Mack from Baldwin County, Alabama, thank you so much for being my guest here on Liberty and Justice. Happy Police Week. Please, again, thank your deputies and all of your staff and tell them how much at least one, humble kid out of Ankeny, Iowa, that, just happened to stumble into Washington, D.C. and become the Attorney General of the United States, appreciates everything they're doing, and we will always have their back, and they will have our thanks. All right, Sheriff?